Welcome back now. The United States National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan is arriving in Israel shortly for talks on Iran's nuclear program. Sullivan will meet President Herzog tonight and will meet Prime Minister Naftali Bennett tomorrow. The 8th round of negotiations with Iran will kick off next week in Vienna. Well, to talk more about all of that, we're joined by Roule, former National Intelligence Manager for Iran and the Office of the Director of National Intelligence and Senior Advisor at the group United Against a Nuclear Iran. He joins us now from Washington, D.C. Good evening to you and thank you for being with us. So this is the latest, isn't it, in a series of back and forths between the Israeli and the US leadership. What is the message that Jake Sullivan is bringing to Israel?
Well, I think it's important to begin first by stating that the United States and Israel probably have a fairly consistent understanding of where the Iranian nuclear program stands and where Iran's negotiating position stands. There's a vast amount of information sharing between the two governments, but they have such dramatically different positions on where the negotiations should take. The administration in Washington is uninterested in anything that raises tensions in the region, and that includes additional pressure on Iran, whereas Israel obviously has a more aggressive view given its position under Iranian threat.
We're getting reports in the Israeli media tonight that President Biden is refusing to talk to Naftali Bennett, the Prime Minister, on the phone and has been for some 3 weeks now. Have you heard those reports? Do you know what to make of that?
Well, I haven't, but that would be very unfortunate. But I do think you've got, through Jake Sullivan's visit and the solid team that he brings with him, pretty good evidence that the channels of communication between the United States and Israel at the working level are quite good and open. Now, again, it comes down to whether or not each side is willing to shift its position for the other, and I don't see that happening. I would have expected that President Biden would take a call from Israel, if only to repeat his position and hope to shift Israel's stance, again, which I don't see happening, but I would find this very unfortunate if this is the case.
We're heading into round 8 of negotiations to revive the JCPOA. Neither side has changed its position. How long can this process go on for? At what point will the US walk away?
Well, the U.S. will be unlikely to walk away, as will Europe or the Russia and China, because if one does so, the next day, comes upon us. What happens next? What exact pressures does one evoke? What sort of military options must be considered? What sort of international diplomacy must be undertaken? And what is the likelihood of that diplomacy succeeding? China and Russia have no interest in pressuring Iran, and therefore an international coalition would be very difficult to put together to increase pressure. So I think the United States will want to expend every opportunity to see if diplomacy can work before it takes that next step.
Now, as you mentioned at the beginning, we know now that Iran's nuclear program is far more advanced than it was just a few years ago. Are we past the point of effective military strikes on Iran? Is the talk of a plan B just hot air, just a negotiating tactic?
Well, although Iran has undertaken activities at its existing sites that exceed those it undertook even a few years ago, the number of sites, locations, and the architecture of those sites hasn't really changed. So if one believed that a military option would work a few years ago, it's not as if the program is so significantly different in its architecture that it would make that impossible. What is happening now is Iran is undertaking different activities at those locations, which are far more aggressive, far more alarming.
Roule, thank you very much indeed.